Recording now. All right, awesome. Can you all see my screen okay? All right. Well, thank you for joining me today. My name is Elena Naids. I'm a design strategist for ExxonMobil and a co-lead for Hexagon UX for the last several years. So I'm really excited to be presenting this topic with y'all called Improv Every Day. So just a little bit more about me. For as long as I can remember, I've always been known as the nerd of my family. I loved going to school and doing math workbooks over the summer. I helped my dad build computers from scratch. And, you know, like most normal 16-year-old girls, I learned how to solve a Rubik's Cube. And I've continued with those types of things into adulthood. So it was no surprise when I decided to pursue my bachelor's in computer engineering at Illinois Tech in Chicago. And when I got there, things were going really great. And I would say sometime in my third year of college, I kind of found myself in a dilemma that's, I think, pretty common to most college students. I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And the only jobs I had had up to that point were in bars and restaurants and in the gym. So I was really fortunate when I stumbled upon an exciting opportunity as an intern at Chicago Museum of Science and Industry. And I'll be completely honest, my main motivation for this particular internship was that it was paid and I wouldn't have to go home for the summer. So that sounded great to me. But little did I know that I would be doing something a lot different than your average museum docent. I discovered that most of the museum staff were actors, actresses, comedians, and improv artists. And we weren't tasked to do things like memorize every little bit of science that was exhibited in this museum. Instead, we started our days with vocal warm-ups and improv games. I was fortunate enough to blow things up in the middle of the main rotunda. We dissected eyeballs, and I even acted in a show called Poop Happens. And this summer internship turned into a 1.5-year-long journey for me. And I really learned how to effectively deliver complicated content, scientific content to children from infants all the way up to senior citizens and executives. So all different types of people. And even in the years following this internship, I didn't truly appreciate how important and applicable the things that I learned there were to both my personal and professional life. And that was over a decade now, as I am aging myself. So if we fast forward to now, as I mentioned, I'm a design strategist within corporate IT at ExxonMobil. And that means that I facilitate a lot of workshops and I present research findings to a lot of management and higher level executives. So with that, my experience at the museum has been completely invaluable. I've had time now to reflect on all of the lessons that I learned there and how those are directly applied to my job today. And so that's what I wanted to share with you is some of the things, some of the specific techniques that I apply today. So the first one is, I would say, one of the most common kind of pillars of improv, and that's the concept of yes and. So if you haven't heard of this concept before, basically it's exactly what it sounds like if you break it apart, but yes means to agree with someone. The and means to then contribute. So don't just agree with someone, but also add something that's meaningful to the conversation or to the presentation. And I wanted to highlight yes and, this concept, with a very famous improv artist, comedian, Tina Fey. She actually shows you an example in this clip of what yes and does look like and what it also does not look like. So check it out here.
Stop. I've got a gun.
The gun? The gun I gave you for our wedding anniversary, Eric? How could you?
We're not married.
Aha. We're not married is a denial. We've learned our first improv lesson.
Sorry, I think that was a bit delayed. So if able to quite catch it, I apologize for that. Tina Fey basically adds to the scene that the gun was something that she gave to him for his wedding, for their wedding, and he immediately negated that fact and didn't contribute, didn't add to the scene. He basically cut it off right where it started. So there was no way to progress forward for them. So this is what the overall improv concept of yes and looks like. What I really want to show you though is how these types of things can be applied in real life or IRL, because I'm like super hip and know these types of acronyms from my 14-year-old niece. So how can we use yes and in real life? First thing I would say is to keep an open mind. And this, is something that's common in my line of work right now is we're in tough market conditions. And so we've been hearing a lot of things like, we don't have the budget to do this. And instead of saying, oh gosh, okay, that sucks. Maybe looking at that as an opportunity. And so that's just the first concept, keeping an open mind on how you can agree with someone. And then add to that in a meaningful way. It's one thing to agree and move on, but it's another to actually add to the conversation and build upon it. So maybe you actually offer up a suggestion. Let's take advantage of the extra time our employees might have right now to do some continuous improvement activities that we've been really needing to do and haven't had the time. That might be one way to contribute. The other thing to be considerate of in this space is to be cautious of using the word but. And you'll start to hear yourself do it a lot now that I've brought it up. And it's just a way that often it negates everything you said before it. And so you just want to be careful in how you use this word or any word that is kind of negating what happened before. The other thing I'll say with yes and is just recognizing that this is not always the appropriate technique. There is a time for brainstorming and contributing in a team and group environment. There's also time for critique. So as designers, we know this especially well, where sometimes we need to hear some of those things that aren't as agreeable. We need to hear kind of that devil's advocate type point of view. So just keep in mind that the yes and is not 100% across the board the technique to use in your communication. So the next technique that I wanted to talk about was playing the part. And what I mean by that is in improv, you have people that are playing all sorts of different roles. And I know for people who aren't extremely comfortable in center stage, someone who might be more introverted might struggle to be the center of attention. And so my suggestion is to play the part of someone that you think is comfortable in center stage and kind of take on the persona of someone else. And this might be a way to help you get more comfortable in that limelight. So here's a quick example of what it looks like in improv to take the role of someone else.
Bachelor number 2.
Yes.
Okay, say I was to lose all my hair. Would you prefer me in a wig or in a hat, and why?
Was that a hair crack? Because it could make me mad. And you wouldn't like me when I'm mad. Big.
Again, I'm sorry about the delay on the video. Hopefully you got the overall point though. And you're probably like, Elena, you're crazy. Are you telling me to play the Hulk in a presentation? Not quite, but maybe something similar to that. I've got a couple examples here that I've kind of used another person and taken on the persona of someone else in order to enable a better presentation or communication. So maybe you need some confidence in a presentation or facilitation or just leading a conversation with someone that you're comfortable with. There's this really great book by Amy Cuddy called Presence, and she talks a lot about how your body and your posture really starts to change the way that your attitude is about something. And so, especially when it comes to something like confidence, she recommends taking the stance of Wonder Woman. And just taking that stance, yeah, thanks, Jade. Take that stance for a whole minute before you go out into public to do a presentation, and just see how it makes you feel. See how your attitude might change by taking on that stance. That's one example of kind of playing the part in order to better present your information. Maybe you're doing something like facilitating a team discussion. A lot of us have probably done this, where we've got opposing opinions in the room, we've got a lot of vocal people, or we've got a lot of people that are really quiet and we need to bring their opinions in. So maybe you're guiding a conversation like that. And I happen to do this a lot in workshops, and I often say the phrase, it's kind of like herding butterflies, which feels very impossible. But the persona I end up taking on in these situations is something like a kindergarten teacher. I kind of know what I need them to get to in the end. I've structured things out in a way that allows them to get to that end point. They might go in 100 different directions before we get to that end point. But I'm also very respectful of everyone's opinion and try to bring in people that maybe aren't engaging. And so I felt like this is how a kindergarten teacher would act with their 5-year-olds. All right, the last one, maybe you're presenting to management, to a higher level of management or executives. And this one's a little silly, but I try to take on this persona of the Dos Equis man, or if you're not familiar, the most interesting man in the world. If you watch his commercials, he's very poised and confident, makes a lot of eye contact. And this is how I've found myself to be pretty successful in communicating with management that is at a much higher level than myself. I know my information, and I can be very direct in how I portray that information to them. So that's another persona that you could potentially take on. All right, so the next technique I wanted to talk about was active listening. This is really big in improv and communication alike. And I think a lot of people have probably heard of this concept before, but really understanding and comprehending what people are saying and not just looking like you're listening or waiting for your turn to speak. Being able to bring in those details that you hear about and bring them back into the fold at a later time. So what this might look like is seeking understanding when you're communicating with others. Something you could say is, let me say back to you what I think I heard you say, to make sure that I fully understood. The other thing I would say here is to kind of connect conversational dots. This is another practice I've found to be really successful, is when we have those tangent conversations, don't just dismiss them necessarily, but think about, as you're hearing them and thinking about them, figure out a way to maybe tie them back in to continue and engage your audience, that you've really heard what they're saying. And so I think this is a great practice. You can do something like, Jamal, I heard your question at the beginning, and I think it was a really great question. And I think it actually really relates to this part of the conversation. So I wanted to bring that back up and talk about it at this point. So one way to practice this technique is a game called One Word Story. And I'm gonna play this video. I hope it's not too off, but I think you'll get the point anyway, so we'll try it.
Once upon a time, there was a big spaceship, and aliens, and mercenaries, and war, and betrayal, and romance, and karate, and credits, the end.
We should write a screenplay together.
Cool. Cool.
I haven't watched Community. It's one of my favorite shows. But you could see in the way that they interacted with each other, they were actively engaged. They were hearing each other in order to continue contributing to the conversation, and they were able to bring it full circle. This is a great technique in improv, storytelling, theater, where things really come full circle. And I use this technique a lot in my presentations. If I can bring things back to something that happened at the beginning that maybe could be still an open question, I try to bring that in the fold and make sure I've answered it at the end. So the fourth technique is address distractions. So what that means is to actually hit that distraction head on before it becomes an even greater distraction if you don't bring it up. Kind of identifying the elephant in the room. I found that to be way more successful than leaving it untouched. This was critical at the museum when I was, blowing things up in front of 200 people, and you've got babies crying, people walking in and out of the show. It's okay to address those things head on. What this looks like in improv is what I call that guy. There's often a person like this on stage where they kind of step out of their character to address something that's going on in the scene that could easily be confusing to the audience if it wasn't addressed kind of outside of that person's original character. And so they bring it up and highlight to the audience, okay, this is actually what's happening, even if you didn't quite get it yet. It helps people to stay engaged, and often it creates some comedic relief as well. So I've got a quick example of this. It's a 2-person improv show, Middleditch and Schwartz. It's on Netflix, it's amazing, but kind of shows this concept of that guy.
It's too dangerous.
What the hell was that? What the hell was that? What the hell was that? Stanley.
Okay, fine. You are German now. I think that's kind of been pretty clear. Someone else had difficulty with it, but okay.
So again, I know it's a weird clip because it's delayed, but the guy on the left steps out of character and says, "You're German now. That was not the accent you had previous to your last statement." And so addressing that to the audience, that he's changed characters completely. Otherwise, the audience could have easily been like, "What are you talking about? Who is this guy again?" And they would completely lose the scene and be disengaged from the rest of the presentation. So this is a technique that you can also bring into your presentations. It even applies over Zoom. If you're still doing in-person meetings, awesome, but on Zoom as well. So you've got people like the late arrivers. So you've got someone that either walks into a meeting late, or you hear a ding on Zoom or Teams or whichever channel or medium you're using these days. Feel free to address it and make them feel welcome, because which one of us hasn't been late to a meeting? So you can say things like, "Come on in, thanks for joining us. We're just getting started. We haven't done anything yet. If there's any initial instructions, feel free to reiterate those." But really address the late arrivers so other people don't get too distracted by them. This one's really relevant right now. We've got children, we've got pets in our Zoom calls. So it can easily become a distraction, or we can leverage it as part of what we're talking about and to provide some comedic relief. So you can say something, and now we're going to hear about little Susie's feedback on this topic as well. So you can do things like that. The one thing I would caution here is, first off, know your audience and be careful calling people out. Some people might not feel comfortable getting called out of a meeting in this way. So what I would say is try to use yourself first. Like I often, in my Zoom calls right now, someone makes a comment about all the guitars behind me. And so I could even start the meeting by, calling myself Led Zeppelin or something that has to do with guitars, because I don't play these guitars and I have no idea what I'm talking about. But I can bring up that distraction first and get people comfortable with kind of calling things out like this. So that would be a caution in using this technique. The next one is awkward silence. For anyone who has done any work in the research field, they know what I'm talking about. And this silence, these pauses, can be used for both dramatic effect and comedic relief. What I would say how to use this is get comfortable with silence, start incorporating it into your regular conversations. one way to get comfortable with the silence is kind of force yourself to take it. Maybe take a drink of water. Maybe pick up a pen or write something down. These are great ways to help get comfortable with silence. Use your pauses intentionally. If we pause too much, it can easily make us seem like we don't know what we're talking about or we're hiding something. So I would say use them intentionally. I love using them for drama. I ask a provocative question and I just let the silence simmer. The other thing I would say about using silence is don't be afraid to stop and think. We do not know everything. None of us do. So it's okay not to know the answer and to have to think about that answer. So feel free to stop, take a pause before you answer something. All right, the last technique I have for y'all is practice. I know you're probably thinking, that's ridiculous. Obviously practice, that's not really that helpful. But I mean something slightly different than just practicing your presentation or your content. What I mean is practice thinking on your feet. This is a pillar of improv, is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And improv artists don't wake up and feel comfortable saying whatever comes to mind. We kind of have to kind of bear down our filters. A lot of times we have so many filters in the way that we speak. And so sometimes practicing thinking on your feet requires you to get out of that mindset and maybe think unfiltered for a little bit in a safe environment. And so I've got some games that you can do either with your families, with your teams and workshops, whatever it might be. And I've specifically picked some that I think you could do over in virtual environments as well. The first one is an alliteration introduction circle. So really all that means is I might put an adjective that starts with my name, the first letter of my name in front of my name. So something like rhythmic Randy or hungry Helena. If you are in person, you can also add a gesture to it to try and get kind of moving and get, again, comfortable with being uncomfortable. Another easy example of this is first letter, last letter. So maybe pick a category like food. And if I said apple, then maybe Jane would say something like eggplant, which starts with an E because apple ended in an E. And so this just makes you can't really prepare for these types of games. So it kind of requires you to just, what's the first thing that comes to mind? It's not right or wrong. Just start getting comfortable with this. And the last one is just a rhyme time, where maybe you pick a word and you have to rhyme with it and you can't be a word that's repeated. And so you, again, have to think on your feet. If someone else said it, then you can't repeat it. So these are just some ways that you can get some practice in some of these techniques. And I hope that these tips were helpful. I just wanted to finish with a Tina Fey quote. Start and finish with her, I might as well. She says, just say yes, and you'll figure it out afterwards. So I hope you'll be able to bring a little improv into your everyday with some of these tips. All right. I know that was kind of a spitfire of things. I did want to open it up for questions at this point.